The night air crackled with the sharp report of gunfire. Muzzle flashes illuminated the darkness in violent bursts, painting ghoulish shadows across the abandoned lumber mill on the banks of Crow River. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung heavy, mixing with the earthy scent of the rushing water below. Margaret Wildcat Hayes pressed her back against the splintered wooden wall, the worn grip of her .357 Magnum slick with sweat in her trembling hand. Her heart hammered against her ribs with such force she feared it might burst. The roar of Harley engines still echoed in her ears, though the bikes had gone silent minutes ago when the ambush began. 20 feet away, Frank Bones Hawkins crouched behind rusted machinery, blood streaming from a gash above his eye. His leather vest, adorned with the Hells Angels' death's head patch, was torn at the shoulder, revealing a maze of faded tattoos beneath. His ice-blue eyes, hard as steel, caught hers across the darkness. A silent message passed between them, a bond forged through years of riding side by side. "We're pinned down, Maggie," he shouted above the din, his voice gravel and whiskey. Reyes's men got the high ground. A bullet splintered the wood above her head, showering her with debris. The rattle of automatic weapons fire intensified from the catwalk above, where Victor Reyes and his drug runners had sprung their trap. What should have been a simple territory negotiation had erupted into all-out war. Wildcat closed her eyes for a split second, steadying her breathing the way her father, a Korean War veteran, had taught her. When her eyes snapped open, they burned with determination. She spotted a rusted staircase to her left that would give her access to the catwalk. It was madness to attempt it, suicide even. But Bones was out of options, and so was she. "Cover me," she yelled, not waiting for acknowledgement before launching herself from behind the wall. The world narrowed to a tunnel of pure adrenaline as she sprinted across the open floor, bullets kicking up dust at her heels. She heard Bones's Colt 45 thunder behind her, forcing their attackers to duck for cover. Her boots pounded up the metal stairs, each step ringing out like a death knell. At the top, she came face to face with Miguel Reyes, Victor's younger brother, a cruel-eyed man with a neck tattoo of a coiled snake. Surprise registered on his face for only a moment before he swung his weapon toward her. Wildcat's reflexes, honed by years of living on the edge, took over. Her .357 barked twice in rapid succession. Miguel stumbled backward, eyes wide with disbelief. For a fraction of a second, time seemed to stop as they locked gazes, hers resolute, his fading. Then he toppled over the railing, falling 20 feet to the concrete floor below with a sickening thud. "Miguel, no!" Victor Reyes's anguished scream cut through the gunfire. The drug lord emerged from the shadows, his face contorted with rage and grief. He raised his weapon at Wildcat, hatred burning in his eyes. A shot rang out. Victor spun, clutching his shoulder as Bones fired from below. The remaining members of Reyes' crew began to scatter, their leader wounded, their advantage lost. "I'll find you," Victor shouted, his voice raw with pain and vengeance. "I swear on my brother's blood, I'll hunt you to the ends of the earth." Wildcat stood frozen, the reality of what she'd done crashing down on her. Below, Bones staggered toward Miguel's motionless form, checking for a pulse he knew wouldn't be there. His eyes, when they met hers again, held a new gravity. This wasn't just another bar fight or territory dispute. A line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. As sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer, Wildcat knew her life would never be the same. The winged skull tattoo on her forearm, the one with the small chip on the right wing where the artist had sneezed mid-stroke, seemed to burn against her skin. It was more than ink now. It was a mark that would forever tie her to this night, to this blood, to the man looking up at her with those piercing blue eyes. What neither of them could know as they fled into the night on their thundering Harleys was that her womb already carried new life, a daughter who would one day bridge the chasm between the woman she was that night and the woman she would fight desperately to become. Ruby's Diner sat at the corner of Main and Elm like a time capsule from a forgotten America. The neon sign buzzed and flickered, casting a warm red glow over the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. Inside the checkered floor, tiles had been worn to a dull sheen by decades of foot traffic, and the vinyl booths were patched with silver duct tape that glinted under the fluorescent lights. The wall-mounted Wurlitzer jukebox, a genuine 1985 model, played Creedence Clearwater Revival's "Have You Ever Seen the Rain?" The familiar melody floating above the clinking of silverware and murmured conversations. Wood-paneled walls were adorned with license plates from all 50 states and faded photographs of pine wood from the 1970s when the lumber industry still kept the small town's heart beating. Lily Hayes moved between the tables with practiced efficiency, coffee pot in hand, her tired eyes belying her youthful face. At 23, she carried herself with the weary dignity of someone far older, her blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her once white sneakers scuffed from countless hours on her feet. "More coffee, Mr. Miller?" she asked, pausing beside the counter, where the old man hunched over his daily breakfast of scrambled eggs and wheat toast. Warren Miller looked up, his weathered face breaking into a smile that deepened the creases around his eyes. At 72, the former Army sergeant still maintained the rigid posture of a military man, though his once broad shoulders had begun to stoop with age. "Don't mind if I do, Lily girl," he replied, pushing his mug toward her. "Refueling from my big adventure to the hardware store." His eyes twinkled with self-deprecating humor. As Lily poured the coffee, Miller launched into one of his well-worn Korean War stories, the one about the freezing night at the Chosin Reservoir when he and his buddies had to burn their own boots for warmth. She'd heard it at least a dozen times, but nodded along as if it were the first. These were the rhythms of her life, the familiar faces, the predictable patterns, the comfort and confinement of a small town where everyone knew not only your name, but your business. 2 years ago, she'd been a nursing student with dreams of working in a big city emergency room. Now she was the girl who dropped out to care for her sick mother, the girl who poured coffee and collected tips that barely covered the electric bill. The bell above the door jingled, and Sheriff Eddie Jackson entered, removing his hat as he stepped inside. At 58, Jackson was still an imposing figure, 6'2" with broad shoulders and a salt and pepper mustache that gave him an air of authority. He nodded to Miller and the Petersons, an elderly couple who occupied the same booth every Tuesday morning, before settling at the counter. "Morning, Lily," he said, his deep voice carrying the gentle drawl of a man who'd spent his youth in Texas before settling in California. "How's your mama doing today?" Lily's smile flickered, genuine but tinged with worry. "Good days and bad, Sheriff. The new medication helps with the chest pains, but it makes her so tired she can hardly get through a shift at the library." Jackson's eyes softened with concern. He'd known Maggie Hayes for nearly 30 years, ever since she'd arrived in Pinewood as a single mother with an infant daughter and a past she never discussed. He'd watched her transform from a wary, defensive woman into a respected member of the community, the town librarian who organized summer reading programs and fought to keep the underfunded library open when the county threatened to close it. "If you two need anything at all," he began, the same offer he'd made countless times before. "I know, Sheriff. Thank you." Lily cut him off gently, not out of rudeness, but from the fierce pride she'd inherited from her mother, the stubborn independence that made accepting help so difficult. She slid a menu in front of him, though they both knew he'd order the same thing he always did: black coffee and a short stack with a side of bacon. Their exchange was part of an unspoken ritual, comfortable in its predictability. As she turned to put in his order, Lily's mind drifted to the strange phone call she'd overheard the night before. She'd arrived home late from her shift to find her mother in the kitchen, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. When Maggie noticed her daughter's presence, she'd abruptly ended the call, her face pale and drawn. "Who was that?" Lily had asked, noting how her mother's hands trembled as she set the phone down. "Nobody," Maggie had replied too quickly. "Just an old acquaintance." But later that night, Lily had awakened to find her mother checking the locks on all the doors and windows, peering anxiously through the curtains at the empty street beyond. When questioned, Maggie had brushed it off as insomnia, but the fear in her eyes told a different story. Now, as Lily moved through the familiar routine of the diner, a sense of unease clung to her like a shadow. Something wasn't right. Her mother, always private but stable, had been acting increasingly erratic over the past week, jumping at sudden noises, making furtive phone calls, checking the rearview mirror constantly when they drove into town. The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, casting golden bars across the worn countertop. The lunch rush had dwindled to a handful of customers, a trucker passing through on his way to Sacramento, a pair of retirees lingering over pie and coffee, and Miller still nursing his third cup at the counter, reluctant to return to the emptiness of his small apartment. Lily wiped down the counter for the third time, her movements mechanical, her mind elsewhere. The medication for her mother's heart condition was getting more expensive, and their insurance covered less each year. The thought of the stack of bills waiting at home made her stomach knot with anxiety. The distant rumble of engines pulled her from her thoughts. It began as a low vibration that seemed to emanate from the ground itself, gradually swelling into a thunderous roar that rattled the windows of the diner. The sound was distinctive and primal, not the efficient purr of modern motorcycles, but the guttural growl of old-school American iron. Conversation died mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even the jukebox seemed to grow quieter as Bob Seger's "Roll Me Away" faded into silence. Warren Miller straightened on his stool, his rheumy eyes suddenly sharp and alert. The elderly couple in the booth exchanged worried glances. Sheriff Jackson, who had returned for a late lunch, set down his coffee cup, slowly his right hand instinctively moving toward his hip where his service weapon rested. Harley's Miller murmured his ear for engines still keen after all these years. Sounds like old ones, panheads or shovelheads, not those plastic-covered touring bikes they make nowadays. The rumble crescendoed to a thunderous peak before cutting off abruptly, leaving a silence so profound it seemed to have physical weight. Through the front windows, Lily could see 5 massive motorcycles lined up in the parking lot, chrome gleaming in the afternoon sun, leather saddlebags worn from thousands of miles on the open road. The bell above the door didn't just jingle this time, it clanged violently as the door swung open with enough force to bang against the wall. The man who entered first filled the doorframe, his presence commanding the room instantly. Tall and broad-shouldered despite his age, he moved with the deliberate grace of a predator, comfortable in its power. A silver-streaked beard reached halfway down his chest, partially obscuring the patches on his leather vest. His hair, more silver than the sandy blonde it had once been, was pulled back in a ponytail that reached between his shoulder blades. But it was his eyes that arrested Lily's attention. Piercing blue, as cold and clear as winter ice, scanning the diner with predatory intensity. They swept past the elderly couple, dismissed the trucker, assessed Miller with a glance, lingered for a moment on Sheriff Jackson, and finally came to rest on her. 5 more men followed him in, each wearing the same leather vests emblazoned with patches and insignia, the most prominent being the distinctive death's head with wings. Hell's Angels. Not weekend riders playing dress-up, but the real thing. Men who lived by a code most people couldn't understand, men whose very presence changed the atmosphere of a room. They moved as a unit, following the leader to the largest booth in the back corner. None of them sat with their backs to the door, an unspoken rule of men who'd learned to watch for threats from all directions. Their boots struck the linoleum with heavy thuds, the chains on their jeans jingling softly with each step. Sheriff Jackson remained outwardly calm, but Lily could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers tapped a silent rhythm on the countertop. Not nervous, but ready. The elderly couple quickly paid their bill and shuffled out, avoiding eye contact with the newcomers. The trucker remained frozen coffee mug halfway to his lips. The leader settled into the booth, his weathered hands, adorned with faded tattoos and heavy silver rings, coming to rest on the table. The others arranged themselves around him, a protective formation that spoke of years riding together, facing threats together, surviving together. Coffee, the leader said, his voice a gravelly rumble that matched the bikes outside. Black, the others echoed the order with nods or grunts. No menus requested, no pleasantries offered. Lily's heart hammered against her ribs. In 3 years of waitressing, she'd served all types, rowdy teenagers, handsy truckers, entitled tourists, but never a group that exuded such raw, contained power. These were men who operated by their own laws, men whose history was written in scars and road dust. Coming right up, she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. As she gathered mugs and filled them from the fresh pot, she could feel the leader's eyes on her. Not in the leering way of some customers, but with a cold assessment that was somehow more unsettling. She sensed he was measuring her, though, for what purpose she couldn't fathom. With the tray of coffee balanced carefully, she approached their table. Her steps faltered slightly as she drew near, but she forced herself to maintain her composure. These were just customers, she told herself. Just men wanting coffee, no different from the farmers and loggers she served every day. But as she set the first mug in front of the leader, she knew that was a lie. Up close, his face told stories of hard miles and harder choices. A thin scar bisected his left eyebrow, and another curved along his jawline. His knuckles were a landscape of old breaks and fights long past. When he reached for the coffee, the sleeve of his vest rode up slightly, revealing a forearm corded with lean muscle and decorated with intricate tattoos. One image in particular caught Lily's eye. A winged skull rendered in black and gray with a distinctive feature she recognized instantly, a small imperfection on the upper right wing, as if the artist's hand had jerked momentarily during its creation. The recognition hit her like an electric shock. She'd seen that exact image with that exact imperfection hundreds of times throughout her childhood. It was etched into her memory as clearly as her own reflection. Before she could stop herself, the words tumbled from her lips, innocent and devastating in their simplicity. "Hello, sir. My mother has a tattoo just like yours." The diner went absolutely still. The trucker at the counter set down his mug with exaggerated care. Miller's eyes widened in alarm. Sheriff Jackson froze, hand hovering near his weapon. The leader's piercing blue eyes locked onto Lily's face with laser intensity. The other bikers shifted subtly, hands disappearing beneath the table or moving toward vests where weapons might be concealed. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees in an instant. "Does she now?" the leader said softly, danger lurking beneath the simple question. "And who might your mother be, girl?" Lily's mouth went dry as she realized her mistake. Whatever she'd stumbled into was far more significant than an odd coincidence about a tattoo. The leader's eyes held recognition, suspicion, and something else. Something that looked unsettlingly like long-buried pain. "Margaret Hayes," she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's the town librarian." A muscle twitched in the leader's jaw. He exchanged glances with the older biker to his right, a man with a long gray beard and arms covered in faded military tattoos. Something unspoken passed between them, some shared memory or knowledge. "Margaret Hayes," the leader repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. His eyes never left Lily's face, studying her features with uncomfortable intensity. "About 55 now, I'd reckon. Blonde hair, maybe some gray these days. Green eyes." It wasn't a question, but Lily nodded anyway, a chill running down her spine. This man knew her mother, not casually but intimately enough to describe her with precision. The realization shifted the ground beneath her feet, opening questions about her mother's past that she'd never thought to ask. "That tattoo," the leader continued, his voice dangerously soft. "The one you mentioned. Where exactly is it on your mother?" Lily swallowed hard. "Her left forearm. She usually keeps it covered. I only saw it a few times growing up when she was gardening or washing dishes." The leader's eyes narrowed. "This mark on the wing, the imperfection, is it a small chip, like someone bumped the artist's hand?" The specificity of the question sent another jolt through Lily. How could he possibly know that detail? It was so minute, so particular. "Yes," she whispered. "She always said the artist sneezed." The atmosphere in the booth changed instantly. The tension didn't disappear, but it transformed, from menacing to something more complex. The leader leaned back slightly, his gaze never leaving Lily's face, but now he was seeing beyond her into the past. "Bones," one of the other bikers said quietly, a warning in his tone. "We should—" The leader, Bones, silenced him with a slight gesture. "Your mother," he said to Lily, "does she know we're in town?" Before Lily could answer, Sheriff Jackson appeared at her side, his presence calm but authoritative. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes alert. Bones' attention shifted to the lawman, his expression hardening again. He studied Jackson for a long moment, recognition slowly dawning in his eyes. "Well, I'll be damned," he said finally, a cold smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Eddie Jackson, last time I saw you, you were a rookie deputy stammering through your first official statement at Crow River." Jackson's face remained impassive, but Lily saw his hand tense at his side. "Folks around here call me Sheriff now. Mr. Hawkins," he replied evenly. "Been a long time." "Frank Bones Hawkins." The leader introduced himself to Lily, ignoring Jackson's comment. "Your mother and I, we rode together many years ago." There was weight to his words, history compressed into that simple statement. Lily's mind reeled. Her mother, the quiet, bookish librarian who got flustered ordering at restaurants, who volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends, who collected first-edition mystery novels, had once ridden with the Hells Angels. It seemed impossible, like a case of mistaken identity. And yet the tattoo— Bones reached into his vest and extracted a crisp $100 bill, placing it deliberately on the table. "For the coffee," he said, then his eyes locking with Lily's again. "Tell Maggie that Bones sends his regards, and tell her Victor Reyes got paroled last month. He hasn't forgotten his promise." The name Reyes struck Lily like a physical blow. She didn't recognize it, but she felt its significance in the sudden chill that permeated the room. "Time we moved on," Bones said to his companions, sliding out of the booth with the fluid grace of a much younger man. The others followed suit, forming a protective phalanx around him as they moved toward the exit. As they passed, Sheriff Jackson Bones paused. "You kept her safe all these years, Eddie. I respect that." The words carried both acknowledgement and warning. Jackson stood his ground. "This is a peaceful town, Hawkins. I'd like it to stay that way." Bones's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Some storms can't be stopped, Sheriff. Only weathered." With that cryptic statement, he led his men outside. The thunder of motorcycle engines shattered the silence moments later, gradually fading as the Hells Angels rode away. But the impact of their visit lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Lily stood frozen, the coffee pot still clutched in her trembling hand. The familiar diner suddenly seemed strange, as if she were seeing it through someone else's eyes. Sheriff Jackson placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Lily," he said gently, "I think you should close up early today. Go home to your mother." "Who was that man?" she asked, her voice small. "How does he know my mom?" Jackson's eyes held a mixture of concern and resignation. "That's a story Maggie needs to tell you herself, but Lily," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully, "your mother may need to make some quick decisions when she hears about this visit. Be prepared." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Lily went through the motions of closing the diner, wiping tables, restocking condiments, counting the register. But her mind was elsewhere, trying to reconcile the mother she knew with the woman Bones Hawkins had known. As she drove home in her beat-up Honda Civic, she rehearsed different ways to approach the subject. How do you ask your mother if she used to be a biker? If she was involved with dangerous men? If she had secrets so significant that their mere mention could bring tension to a sheriff's eyes? The small blue house at the end of Maple Street looked the same as always. Neat garden beds flanking the front walk, wind chimes tinkling from the porch. Eaves, a ceramic welcome sign shaped like an open book. So ordinary, so at odds with the revelations of the day. Lily parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, gathering her courage. Through the front window, she could see her mother moving about the living room, shelving books. The familiar sight, ishing, so domestic, so normal, almost made Lily doubt everything that had happened at the diner. But Bones's words echoed in her mind. "Tell Maggie that Victor Reyes got paroled." Whoever this Reyes person was, his name carried enough weight to warrant a cross-country motorcycle journey to deliver a warning. Taking a deep breath, Lily exited the car and walked toward the house. Before she reached the porch steps, the front door swung open. Maggie Hayes stood in the doorway, her face pale with concern. "You're home early," she said, her eyes scanning the street behind Lily. "Is everything okay?" At 55, Margaret Hayes remained a striking woman. Her blonde hair, now streaked with silver, was cut in a practical shoulder-length style. Reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck, resting against her simple blue cardigan. To anyone else, she would look like the quintessential small-town librarian. Gentle, unassuming, perhaps a bit shy. But now, looking at her mother with new eyes, Lily could see something else beneath the surface. A wariness in her stance, a guardedness that had always been there, but that Lily had never truly recognized until this moment. "Someone came to the diner today," Lily said, watching her mother carefully. "A man named Bones Hawkins." The effect was instantaneous. The color drained from Maggie's face. The book in her hands tumbled to the floor. For a moment, she seemed unable to speak, her green eyes wide with something between shock and terror. "Frank," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "Frank was here, in Pinewood." The confirmation hit Lily like a physical blow. Her mother not only knew this man, but had called him by his first name with a familiarity that spoke volumes. "He and some other Hells Angels," Lily continued, stepping closer. "Mom, he saw me and knew who I was. He knew about your tattoo, the one you always keep covered. He said to tell you that Victor Reyes is out of prison." Maggie's hand flew to her, stifling a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. She grabbed Lily's arm with surprising strength, pulling her inside and locking the door behind them. "Did anyone follow you home?" she demanded, moving to the windows to check the street outside. "Did they say anything else? Did they threaten you?" "No, Mom, they didn't." "We need to pack," Maggie interrupted, already moving toward the hall closet where they kept their suitcases. "Just essentials. We can be on the road in 20 minutes. Lily stood stunned, watching as her mother, the woman who had taught her to face problems head-on, to never run from difficulties, began pulling suitcases from the closet with frantic energy. "Mom, stop!" Lily grabbed her mother's arms, forcing her to pause. "What's going on? Who is this Bones person? And who is Victor Reyes? Why are you so scared?" Maggie's eyes met her daughter's, filled with a complex mixture of fear, regret, and fierce protectiveness. For a long moment, she seemed to be weighing how much to reveal, how much Lily could handle knowing. "Victor Reyes," she finally said, her voice low and strained, "is a very dangerous man who believes I took something from him 30 years ago. Something he's been waiting to get back. And he won't care who gets hurt in the process." "What did you take?" Lily asked, struggling to make sense of her mother's words. Maggie turned away, moving to the bedroom with purposeful strides. "We don't have time for the whole story right now. We need to." A sharp crack split the air. The living room window shattered, sending glass spraying across the carpet. A dark stain appeared on Maggie's cardigan as she spun around, her hand flying to her face. Blood seeped between her fingers from a cut on her cheek where a shard of glass had struck her. "Get down!" Maggie shouted, dropping to her knees and pulling Lily down with her. Another shot rang out, this one punching through the wall above their heads. Plaster dust rained down on them as they crawled toward the kitchen. With a speed and precision that belied her bookish appearance, Maggie reached beneath the kitchen sink and extracted a metal lockbox. Her fingers, steady despite the chaos, worked the combination lock. Inside was a gleaming Beretta 9mm handgun that she handled with the confidence of long familiarity. "Mom," Lily gasped, unable to reconcile the sight of her gentle, book-loving mother holding a gun with such practiced ease. "Stay low." Maggie ordered, all traces of the mild-mannered librarian gone. Her eyes had hardened, her posture transformed. Shoulders squared, chin raised, movements precise and controlled. In her place was a stranger with her mother's face, a woman who knew how to handle herself in danger. A third shot shattered the kitchen window. Maggie returned fire, 2 precise shots through the broken glass. From outside came a cry of pain and the sound of running footsteps. "The back door," Maggie commanded, already moving in that direction. "My car keys are on the hook. We'll take the service road behind the Peterson farm." As they reached the back door, the roar of a motorcycle engine erupted from the front of the house, quickly receding into the distance. Their attacker was retreating, at least for now. Maggie paused at the door, pressing her back against the wall as she peered cautiously through the small window. Satisfied that the immediate danger had passed, she turned to her daughter, her expression grave. "Lily, I need you to trust me right now. There are things about my past, about who I was before you were born, that I never wanted you to know, but now you're in danger because of me, and I can't keep you safe without help." "Help from who?" Lily asked, her world tilting on its axis. The mother she thought she knew was dissolving before her eyes, replaced by this competent, dangerous woman who fired guns and spoke of violent men as old acquaintances. Maggie's answer came as she reached for her phone, dialing a number from memory, a number she shouldn't have remembered after 30 years, if it had been as insignificant as she'd always pretended her past was. "From the people who knew me when I was someone else," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper as the call connected. "This is Wildcat," she said into the phone, the nickname falling from her lips as naturally as if she'd used it yesterday. "I need to activate the Crow River Protocol. They found us." As Maggie spoke, her free hand unconsciously moved to her left forearm, fingers tracing the outline of the tattoo hidden beneath her cardigan sleeve, the winged skull with the small chip on the right wing, the mark that connected her to a past. She'd spent 23 years running from a past that had finally caught up with them. Outside, the wail of police sirens approached, Sheriff Jackson responding to the shots fired. But Lily knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that local law enforcement wouldn't be enough to protect them from whatever storm was breaking over their lives. The peaceful existence she'd known, the small-town routine she'd both cherished and chafed against, had been shattered as completely as the windows of their home. In its place was a terrifying unknown, populated by men like Bones Hawkins and Victor Reyes, men who operated by codes she didn't understand and who carried 3-decade-old grudges across state lines. As her mother's urgent conversation continued, and Lily's gaze fell on a framed photograph that had fallen from the wall during the shooting, a picture of herself as a newborn, cradled in her mother's arms. Maggie looked exhausted but radiant, her eyes full of fierce love and determination. It was dated October 1992, just months after the incident at Crow River, that her mother had never mentioned until today. The realization struck Lily with stunning clarity. Her very existence was intertwined with whatever had happened at Crow River 30 years ago. She wasn't just collateral damage in an old feud. She was in some fundamental way she didn't yet understand central to it. As Sheriff Jackson's cruiser screeched to a halt in their driveway, Lily made a silent vow she would no longer be the innocent bystander in her own story. Whatever secrets her mother had kept, whatever danger they now faced, she would meet it head-on. With the same determination she saw in her mother's eyes as she continued her urgent conversation, the same determination that had driven Margaret Wildcat Hayes to create a new life from the ashes of her old one. The storm hadn't just arrived, it had been brewing all her life, and now at last she would discover what lay at its center. The cabin sat nestled among towering pines, its weathered logs the color of aged bourbon in the late afternoon sun. A quarter-mile off the main highway, accessible only by a rutted dirt road that Sheriff Jackson's cruiser navigated with practiced ease, it offered the one thing Maggie and Lily Hayes needed most: anonymity. "My old hunting cabin," Jackson explained as he cut the engine, "hasn't been on any property records since '97. County thinks it burned down in a forest fire." The interior was sparse but functional. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flanked by shelves holding battered paperbacks and fishing tackle. A worn leather couch faced the hearth, its cushions molded to the shape of a man who'd spent countless solitary evenings there. A small kitchen occupied one corner, while a ladder led to a sleeping loft beneath the peaked roof. Maggie stood by the window, the Beretta still clutched in her right hand, her left arm pressed against her side where blood had begun to seep through her cardigan. The bullet had only grazed her, but the wound needed attention. "First aid kit's in the bathroom cabinet." Jackson set his eyes on the bloodstain. "I'll check the perimeter." As the sheriff stepped outside, Lily guided her mother to the couch. The shock of the past hour had left her numb, operating on pure adrenaline. Her nursing training took over as she located the first aid supplies and began cleaning the wound. "It's not deep," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Won't need stitches." Maggie nodded, her eyes fixed on the door, her body tense as a drawn bowstring. She barely flinched as Lily dabbed antiseptic on the raw flesh. "Mom, Lily said, applying gauze and tape with practiced hands. "I need you to tell me what's happening. Who are these people? Why are they shooting at us?" Maggie closed her eyes briefly, exhaustion etched into the fine lines of her face. When she opened them, they held a steely resolve that Lily had glimpsed only in rare moments throughout her childhood. When the library faced budget cuts, when Lily had pneumonia at age 8, when they'd nearly lost their house during the recession. "I never wanted you to know this part of me," Maggie began, her voice low. "I wanted to protect you from who I was before, from the life I left behind when I found out I was pregnant with you." The door opened and Jackson stepped back inside, his weathered face grim. "No sign of anyone following us, but that doesn't mean they won't. These men have resources." "They'll find us eventually," Maggie said with quiet certainty. "Victor Reyes has been waiting 30 years for this. He won't give up now." Jackson settled into a chair across from them, his service weapon resting on his thigh. "Lily deserves to know, Maggie. Everything." A silent communication passed between the sheriff and Lily's mother. Decades of shared history of secrets kept. Finally, Maggie nodded. "Before I was Margaret Hayes' librarian and mother," she began, her fingers unconsciously tracing the outline of the tattoo beneath her sleeve, "I was Wildcat, a full-fledged member of the Hells Angels." The confession hung in the air, transforming the space between them. Lily tried to reconcile this revelation with the woman who'd baked cookies for PTA meetings, who color-coded her bookshelves, who got flustered trying to program the deep. "Frank Bones Hawkins was the chapter president," Maggie continued. "He took me in when I was 19 after my father disowned me. The club became my family." She rolled up her sleeve, fully revealing the tattoo she'd kept hidden for decades. The winged skull with its distinctive imperfection on the right wing. The ink had faded somewhat, but remained a stark reminder of a life Lily had never imagined. In the early 90s, Northern California was contested territory. The club was expanding its operations. Maggie chose her words carefully. "Bones and I, we were more than just club members. We were together, had been for years." Jackson shifted uncomfortably, his eyes on the floor. Victor Reyes was a rising force in the drug trade, ambitious, ruthless, building an empire along the border and pushing north. When his operation began encroaching on club territory, tensions escalated. Maggie's voice grew distant, lost in memories. Everything came to a head at Crow River in '92. A flash of recognition crossed Lily's face. That's what Bones mentioned at the diner, Crow River. Maggie nodded grimly. It was supposed to be a negotiation, a setting of boundaries. Instead, it turned into an ambush. Reyes and his men had the high ground, had us pinned down in that old lumber mill. Her eyes took on a faraway look, seeing not the cabin walls, but the blood-soaked memories of 30 years past. I killed Miguel Reyes that night, Victor's younger brother. Shot him when he was about to kill Bones. Her voice remained steady, but her hands trembled slightly. It wasn't planned. It was survival. But to Victor, it didn't matter. His brother was dead and someone had to pay. Jackson leaned forward. I was a rookie deputy first on scene after the shootout. By the time I got there, most of them had scattered. Found Miguel's body and shell casings everywhere. It was my first major case. Maggie's eyes met his. You knew even then. The sheriff nodded. I had my suspicions, but there was no conclusive evidence linking you directly to Miguel's death. And then a week later, you walked into the station, alone, terrified, pregnant. Lily's breath caught. The timeline suddenly aligned with crystal clarity. You were already pregnant with me when this happened. 8 weeks, Maggie confirmed. I hadn't told anyone yet, not even Bones. When the shooting started that night, when I took a life to save another, something in me changed. I realized I couldn't bring a child into that world. She reached out, taking Lily's hand. I made a choice that night, to leave it all behind to become someone else, someone worthy of being your mother. And Jackson helped you, Lily said, the pieces falling into place. The sheriff nodded. Got her a new identity, helped her relocate to Pinewood. No one would look for a Hell's Angel in a quiet logging town working as a library assistant. But what about Bones? Lily asked. Didn't he look for you? Pain flashed across Maggie's face. I left a letter telling him I needed to get clean to start over. I never mentioned the pregnancy. I knew he'd never let me go if he knew about you, and I needed to break free completely. Yet Jackson stood, moving to the window to scan the darkening forest outside. Maggie Hayes became a model citizen, finished her degree through night classes, raised you alone, became head librarian. No one in Pinewood ever suspected. But what does Victor Reyes want after all this time? Lily asked, struggling to process the magnitude of her mother's revelations. Revenge. Maggie and Jackson exchanged a loaded glance. Not just revenge, Maggie said quietly. Money. $2 million that disappeared the night of the shootout. Lily's eyes widened. $2 million. Drug money, Jackson clarified. The Reyes cartel had brought it for a territory payment. In the chaos after the shooting, it vanished. And Reyes thinks you took it, Lily concluded. Maggie's silence was answer enough. Did you go? Lily's question hung in the air, loaded with 30 years of secrets. Before Maggie could respond, the distant sound of motorcycle engines shattered the moment. Jackson moved swiftly to the door, drawing his weapon. Stay inside, he ordered, his voice shifting to the authoritative tone of the sheriff rather than the family friend. Keep away from the windows. As the door closed behind him, Lily turned to her mother, questions burning in her eyes. But Maggie was already in motion, moving to a wooden chest in the corner of the cabin. With surprising strength, she dragged it away from the wall, revealing a small trapdoor in the floorboards. If anything happens, she said urgently, there's a tunnel that leads to the creek bed. Follow it downstream for half a mile, then head east through the forest. There's an old ranger station, abandoned, but the radio still works in emergencies. Mom, I'm not leaving you. Listen to me. Maggie gripped Lily's shoulders, her green eyes fierce. Everything I've done for the past 30 years has been to keep you safe, to give you a life beyond what I had. I won't let that be for nothing. The roar of motorcycles grew louder, then cut off abruptly. Voices carried through the trees, men's voices, rough with age and hard living. Maggie moved to the window, peering carefully around the edge of the curtain. It's Bones, she whispered, a complex mixture of emotions coloring her voice. Relief, fear, and something deeper that Lily couldn't quite identify. Outside, Sheriff Jackson stood on the porch, his stance wide hand resting on his holstered weapon as 6 motorcycles rolled into the clearing. The riders dismounted with the fluid grace of men who had lived most of their lives on 2 wheels. Bones led them, his imposing figure unmistakable even in the gathering dusk. "Evening, Sheriff," he called, his gravelly voice carrying through the cabin's thin walls. "Saw your cruiser headed this way. Figured Maggie might need some backup." "How did you find this place?" Jackson demanded. Bones's laugh was like stones in a tumbler. "You really think I haven't kept tabs on Maggie all these years? Known about this cabin since '98. Never had reason to come calling until now." "We don't need your kind of help," Jackson replied. "Don't you?" Bones countered. "The man who shot up Maggie's house wasn't working alone. Daniel Reyes, Victor's son, has a dozen men in town already. You really think your department of 3 deputies can handle that?" Inside the cabin, Maggie's face had gone pale. "Daniel," she whispered, "Victor's boy." "You know him?" Lily asked. "He was just a child when Miguel died. 9, maybe 10. Maggie's voice was distant. Victor was grooming him even then to take over the family business someday. On the porch, Jackson's posture had shifted subtly from confrontational to reluctantly collaborative. "How do you know all this?" "The club has eyes and ears everywhere," Bones replied. "Been tracking Victor since he got paroled. We knew he'd come for Maggie eventually." Jackson hesitated, then stepped aside, a silent invitation to approach the cabin. As the bikers moved forward, Maggie straightened her shoulders, visibly transforming before Lily's eyes. The mild-mannered librarian receded, and in her place stood someone harder, someone who had once commanded respect among dangerous men. "Stay behind me," she told Lily, moving toward the door. When she pulled it open, the years seemed to fall away. Maggie and Bones stood facing each other for the first time in 3 decades, the weight of their shared past hanging between them like an electrical charge. His ice-blue eyes moved from her face to the bloodstain on her cardigan, then back again. "Hello, Cat," he said, using the shortened version of her old road name. His voice had softened, losing some of its dangerous edge. "Frank," she replied, her voice steady, despite the storm of emotions Lily could see in her eyes. Bones' weathered face betrayed little, but something flickered in his gaze as he looked at her. A complex mixture of old pain, lingering anger, and something that might have been tenderness. "Heard you took a bullet," he said. "Just a graze." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Always were too stubborn to get properly shot." Despite everything, Maggie's mouth quirked upward at one corner. A glimpse of a younger, wilder woman who had once matched this man's dangerous energy with her own. His gaze shifted to Lily, standing behind her mother. For a long moment, he studied her face with uncomfortable intensity, as if searching for something or someone in her features. "She has your eyes," he said to Maggie. "But that chin, that's pure Hawkins." The statement hung in the air like a thunderclap. Lily felt the ground shift beneath her feet, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place with devastating clarity. "You never told her," Bones said, not a question, but a statement, his eyes never leaving Maggie's face. "There was never a right time," Maggie replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Lily looked between them, her world reshaping itself around this new revelation. Bones wasn't just some man from her mother's past. He wasn't just the leader of a motorcycle club who had once known her mother. He was her father. The knowledge settled into her bones with an odd sense of rightness, as if some part of her had always known, had recognized something familiar in those ice-blue eyes when he'd walked into the diner. Sheriff Jackson cleared his throat, breaking the charged moment. "We should move inside. Too exposed out here." The small cabin quickly filled with the presence of the Hells Angels, their weathered leather vests, their scarred hands, their vigilant eyes constantly scanning for threats. They moved with the synchronized awareness of men who had faced danger together for decades, positioning themselves near windows and doors without being told. One of them, an older man with a long gray beard and arms covered in military tattoos, approached Maggie with something like reverence. "Wildcat," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Damn good to see you, girl." "Preacher," she replied, a genuine smile breaking through her tension. "Still riding that beat-up panhead." "Till they put me in the ground," he confirmed with a nod. Bones had moved to the window, his posture alert as he surveyed the darkening forest. "Victor's been planning this since the day he got his parole date." He said, his voice all business now. "He's convinced you took the money, Cat." Maggie's eyes darted to Jackson, then back to Bones. I didn't, she said firmly. Bones turned, fixing her with a penetrating stare. $2 million doesn't just vanish. Someone took it that night. It wasn't me, Maggie insisted. A heavy silence fell over the cabin. Lily could sense the undercurrents of old suspicions, of questions left unanswered for 3 decades. Doesn't matter now, Bones finally said, though his eyes suggested otherwise. What matters is that Victor believes you have it, and he won't stop until he gets it, or extracts his pound of flesh. We need to leave, Jackson interjected. Get Maggie and Lily somewhere safe until we can sort this out. Bones shook his head. Running won't solve this. Victor has resources connections. He'll find them eventually. Better to face this head on. And risk their lives, Jackson demanded, his protective instincts flaring. They're already at risk, Bones countered. Daniel Reyes isn't playing games. That shot at the house wasn't meant to kill, just to scare. Next time he won't miss. Lily, who had been silent as she processed the seismic revelations about her parentage, finally spoke. I want to know everything, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. No more secrets, no more half-truths. If I'm in danger, if we're going to face this, I deserve to know what really happened that night. All eyes turned to her, Jackson's concern, the bikers appraising Bones, unreadable. But it was her mother's gaze that Lily held, challenging her to finally reveal the whole truth. Maggie sank onto the couch, suddenly looking every one of her 55 years. You're right, she conceded. You deserve to know. She looked up at Bones. Both of you do. Bones pulled a wooden chair from the small dining table, positioning it to face Maggie while keeping the door in his line of sight. Old habits of survival. The other bikers arranged themselves around the cabin's perimeter, a protective circle of leather and vigilance. The night at Crow River wasn't just about territory. Maggie began, her voice taking on the cadence of a confession long delayed. Victor Reyes had approached the club with a business proposition, a partnership in drug distribution across Northern California. The $2 million was a good faith payment, a down payment on future profits. Jackson leaned against the wall, arms crossed. The official report never mentioned any money. Because officially it was never there, Bones interjected. Bad for business all around to have that kind of cash on record. Maggie continued, Bones was against the partnership from the start. He didn't trust Reyes, didn't want the club that deep in the drug trade. But some of the other chapter presidents were pushing for it. The money was too good to pass up. It was a trap from the beginning, Bones added, his voice hard with old anger. Reyes never intended a partnership. He wanted to eliminate competition, take over our territory, our connections. When the shooting started, everyone scattered, Maggie said. After Miguel fell, I made it back down to the main floor. That's when I saw Snake. Jacob Miller, Bones explained for Lily's benefit, called him Snake. He was our treasurer back then. He had the duffel bag with the money, Maggie continued. He was heading for the side exit away from the fighting. I called out to him, but he didn't stop. It was chaos, bullets flying, sirens approaching. I had to make a choice, go after Snake or get back to Bones, who was wounded. Her eyes met Bones across the small space. I chose you. Something passed between them, an old current of connection that 30 years of separation hadn't fully severed. By the time the police arrived, Snake was gone. So was the money, Maggie finished. I always assumed he took it, went underground. Snake disappeared that night, Bones confirmed. Never saw him again. All of us figured he was dead, killed by Reyes' men or cops during the escape. But Victor always believed I had the money, Maggie said. Maybe because I was one of the few who made it out clean, or maybe because I disappeared soon after. Lily leaned forward. So this man is hunting you, hunting us, for money you never took. Men have killed for less, Bones said grimly. And for Victor, it's not just about the money anymore. It's about his brother, about 30 years of building this up in his mind. It's about revenge. One of the bikers at the window, younger than the others with a shaved head and a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, suddenly tensed. Movement in the trees, he said, sharply reaching inside his vest. In an instant, the atmosphere in the cabin transformed. Weapons appeared as if by magic in weathered hands. Jackson drew his service pistol, moving swiftly to the window. 3 vehicles coming up the access road, he reported. Headlights off. Bones was on his feet, his movements fluid and decisive despite his age. "Preacher Lou, back door. Hammer, watch that window. Sheriff, you and I take the front." He turned to Maggie, their eyes meeting in silent communication born of years riding side by side through danger. No words were needed. They had done this dance before long ago. Maggie nodded, grabbing Lily's arm and pulling her toward the trapdoor she'd shown her earlier. "Time to go," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "I'm not leaving you," Lily protested. "You're not," Bones said, appearing beside them. "But we need to move you both somewhere more defensible. This cabin's a death trap if they have any serious firepower." He knelt, pulling up the trap door to reveal a narrow passage dug into the earth beneath the cabin. "Eddie's grandfather was a bootlegger," he explained with grim humor. "Built this place with escape in mind." Lily stared at the dark opening, then at the man she had just discovered was her father. "You're coming with us." Bones shook his head. "Someone needs to slow them down, buy you time." His eyes, so like her own in their intensity, if not their color, held hers for a moment. "Your mother will keep you safe. She always has." The rumble of approaching engines grew louder, punctuated by the metallic click of weapons being readied. Jackson appeared at their side, his expression grim. "At least 6 men, maybe more," he reported, armed. "Get them out of here," Bones ordered. "We'll hold them off." Jackson hesitated, decades of law enforcement training warring with the reality of their situation. Finally, he nodded. "The tunnel comes out by the creek. Follow it downstream to the old fire road. My cruiser keys are in my jacket. Take it and head for the county line." "Eddie," Maggie's voice was soft but urgent. "Be careful." The sheriff's weathered face softened briefly. "Always in Mags." As Jackson turned back toward the front of the cabin, Maggie grasped Bones's arm. "Frank," she began, a lifetime of unspoken words hanging between them. He covered her hand with his own. "Scarred, tattooed, powerful." "I know," he said simply. "Go. Keep her safe." With a final nod, he moved away, barking orders to his men as they took up defensive positions throughout the small cabin. Maggie descended first into the narrow tunnel, the Beretta still clutched in her hand. Lily followed the earthen walls, pressing close on either side. Jackson pulled the trapdoor shut above them, plunging them into darkness, broken only by the thin beam of a small flashlight Maggie had produced from her pocket. As they crawled forward through the damp passage, the muffled sound of the first gunshots erupted above them. Lily flinched instinctively, wanting to turn back to help the men fighting above. Jackson, who had been a constant protective presence in her life, and Bones, the father she had never known, but who was now risking his life to protect her. "Keep moving," Maggie urged, her voice steady despite the chaos they'd left behind. "Trust them to do what they do best." The tunnel stretched for what felt like miles, though in reality it couldn't have been more than 100 yards. Finally, Maggie pushed aside a camouflage grate, and they emerged into the cool night air beside a shallow creek. The sound of gunfire was more distant and sporadic rather than the initial fusillade. Maggie helped Lily to her feet, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "This way," she said, leading them downstream, where the water gurgled over smooth stones. They moved as quietly as possible, the moon providing just enough light to navigate by. Lily's mind raced, trying to process everything she had learned in the past few hours. Her mother's secret past, her father's identity, the danger that had been stalking them unknowingly for years. "All this time," she said softly as they picked their way along the creek bank, "all those years in Pinewood, you knew they might come for us someday." Maggie didn't slow her pace, but her voice carried back. "I hoped they wouldn't. Hoped Victor would die in prison, or that time would dull his need for vengeance." She ducked under a low-hanging branch. "But I always prepared for the worst." "The gun under the sink," Lily said. "The emergency cache you keep hidden in the hollowed-out book. When you have something precious to protect." Maggie replied, her voice softening. "You don't leave anything to chance." They reached a point where the creek bed widened, joining a larger stream. Maggie paused, orienting herself by the stars visible through the tree canopy. "The fire road should be just beyond that ridge," she said, pointing. "From there, it's about 2 miles to where Jackson left his cruiser." As they started up the incline, a twig snapped somewhere to their left. Maggie froze her hand, shooting out to stop Lily. They stood motionless, barely breathing, as the forest around them seemed to hold its breath. Another sound, the soft crunch of boots on fallen leaves deliberately placed to minimize noise. Someone was tracking them, and they were good at it. Maggie raised the Beretta. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the shadows between the trees. She pushed Lily behind her, backing them slowly toward a cluster of boulders that would provide some cover. "When I say run," she whispered, her lip barely moving, "head straight for the ridge. Don't stop. Don't look back." "Mom, I'm not leaving you," Lily hissed back. "This isn't a debate," Maggie replied, her voice taking on the hard edge Lily had only begun to recognize. The voice of Wildcat, not Margaret Hayes, the librarian. "I'll be right behind you." Before Lily could protest further, a figure stepped from the shadows 20 yards ahead. A man in his early 30s with close-cropped, dark hair and the unmistakable bulge of a shoulder holster beneath his jacket. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were predatory, scanning the forest with practiced precision. "Mrs. Hayes," he called, his voice pleasant despite the circumstances. "Or do you prefer Wildcat? I've heard so many stories about you over the years, I feel like we're already acquainted." Maggie's grip on the Beretta tightened, but she remained silent, her body angled to shield Lily from view. "My name is Daniel Reyes," the man continued, taking another step forward. "I believe you knew my Uncle Miguel, before you shot him and watched him fall to his death." The words were delivered with chilling casualness, as if he were commenting on the weather, rather than a 3-decade-old killing. "Your father sent men to kill us," Maggie finally responded, her voice steady. "Miguel made his choice. I made mine." Daniel smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Choices have consequences, Mrs. Hayes. My father has waited 30 years to teach you that lesson." His gaze shifted, focusing on Lily behind her mother's protective stance. "And now he gets to teach it to your daughter as well." At the mention of Lily, something changed in Maggie's demeanor. A subtle shift from defensive to dangerously offensive. Lily had never seen this side of her mother, this coiled readiness that reminded her of a predator preparing to strike. "My quarrel was never with you, Daniel," Maggie said, her voice taking on a persuasive quality. "You were just a boy when it happened. This vendetta belongs to your father, not you." "Family is everything, Mrs. Hayes," Daniel replied. "Surely you understand that." His hand moved slowly toward his holster. "Now we can do this the easy way. You come with me, tell my father where you've hidden the money all these years, and your daughter walks away unharmed. Or—" The implied threat hung in the air between them. "Run," Maggie whispered to Lily, the single word barely audible. But before either of them could move, the night erupted with the roar of a motorcycle engine. Headlights cut through the trees as a Harley broke from the forest to their right, bearing down on Daniel Reyes with unstoppable momentum. Daniel spun, reaching for his weapon, but he was too slow. The motorcycle slammed into him, sending him flying into the underbrush with a sickening thud. The rider skidded to a halt, the bike's engine growling like an angry beast in the quiet forest. When he removed his helmet, Lily recognized the younger biker from the cabin, the one with the shaved head and scarred eyebrow. "Hammer," Maggie breathed, relief evident in her voice. The biker nodded curtly. "Bones sent me to find you. Reyes' men split up when they realized you weren't in the cabin. Half of them headed this way." "The others?" Maggie asked urgently. "Frank Eddy." "Holding their own," Hammer replied. "Sheriff took one in the shoulder, but he'll live. Bones—" A flicker of admiration crossed his face. "Man fights like someone half his age." A moan from the underbrush reminded them of Daniel's presence. Hammer dismounted, moving swiftly to where Reyes lay sprawled among the fallen leaves. A quick check confirmed what Lily's medical training had already told her. Multiple broken bones, probable internal injuries, but still alive. "What do you want to do with him?" Hammer asked Maggie, his hand hovering near his waistband, where a weapon undoubtedly waited. Maggie looked at the son of her nemesis, the man who had just threatened her daughter's life, who had been raised from childhood to hate her. For a moment, Lily saw something dark and capable flash across her mother's face, something that belonged to the woman she had been 30 years ago. Then Maggie glanced at Lily and the darkness receded. "Secure him. He's our leverage now." As Hammer zip-tied Daniel's hands, Maggie turned to her daughter. "The situation's changed. We need to get back to the cabin." "But the others coming this way," Lily began. "Won't expect us to double back," Maggie finished, "especially not on that." She nodded toward the motorcycle. Hammer stood hauling the semi-conscious Daniel to his feet. "We'll have to leave him. I can take you both back on the bike." Maggie shook her head. "You take Lily. I'll make my own way." "Mom, no, listen to me," Maggie cut her off, gripping her shoulders. I've been navigating these woods for 30 years. I know every trail, every hiding spot. I'll be right behind you. Her eyes, so like Lily's own, held a fierce certainty. Trust me. Before Lily could argue further, the distant crack of gunfire erupted from the direction they had been heading. Reyes's men closing in. Go, Maggie urged, giving Lily a gentle push toward the motorcycle. I'll meet you at the cabin, I promise. Hammer didn't wait for further discussion. He secured Daniel to a tree with a second set of zip ties, then mounted his bike, gesturing for Lily to climb on behind him. As the motorcycle's engine roared to life, Lily looked back at her mother. Standing straight and unafraid in the moonlight, the Beretta held comfortably in her hand, her eyes alert and alive with a fierce intelligence that Lily had glimpsed only in rare moments throughout her life. For the first time, she was seeing Margaret Hayes as she truly was. Not just the gentle librarian who had raised her, but the woman beneath Wildcat survivor fighter, her mother. As Hammer gunned the engine and the bike surged forward, Lily held that image in her mind, a talisman against the uncertainty that lay ahead, a promise that the woman who had protected her for 23 years would find her way back. What she couldn't know as the motorcycle carried her back through the darkened forest toward the cabin was that the night's revelations had only just begun, and that the most dangerous secrets were still waiting to be unearthed. Dawn broke over the forest in pale streaks of amber and gold, illuminating the aftermath of battle. Sheriff Jackson's cabin, once a sanctuary of solitude, now bore the scars of the night's violence. Bullet holes peppering the walls, windows shattered the porch. Railings splintered and broken. Inside, the air hung heavy with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the metallic tang of blood. Bones Hawkins stood at the window, a Winchester rifle cradled in his weathered hands, as he surveyed the clearing, his ice-blue eyes alert despite having gone without sleep. A makeshift bandage encircled his left forearm, where a bullet had carved a furrow through flesh and muscle, but he seemed oblivious to the wound. Sheriff Jackson sat at the small kitchen table, his shoulder properly dressed now, thanks to Lily's skilled hands. His face was drawn with pain and exhaustion, but his eyes remained steady as he checked the ammunition in his service weapon. They'll be back, Bones said, his voice a graveled rumble in the morning quiet. Victor won't give up that easy. Jackson nodded grimly. We took down 3 of his men, wounded at least 2 more, but he had a dozen to start with. Plus whatever local muscle he's hired, Bones added. He turned as the cabin door opened, admitting Preacher and Lou, 2 of his oldest club brothers, returning from a perimeter check. All clear for now, Preacher reported, his long gray beard now singed on one side from a too-close encounter with a muzzle flash. Found tire tracks heading back toward the highway. Looks like they've pulled back to regroup. Lou, a barrel-chested man with arms like tree trunks, eased himself onto the couch with a barely suppressed groan. At 68, he was the oldest among them, but he had fought with the ferocity of a man half his age through the night. Won't last long, he muttered. Victor's not the type to lick his wounds for more than a few hours. The roar of a motorcycle engine cut through their conversation. Bones moved to the window, rifle raised, then relaxed slightly as he recognized the approaching bike. It's Hammer, he said, and Lily. Jackson was on his feet in an instant, pain forgotten as he moved to the door. The motorcycle skidded to a halt in the clearing, dust billowing around it. Lily dismounted, her face pale, but determined, her clothes smudged with dirt and pine needles from the forest floor. Where's Maggie? Jackson demanded as she approached the porch. We got separated, Lily explained, her voice tight with worry. Daniel Reyes found us by the creek. Hammer took him down, but we heard more of them coming. Mom sent me back with Hammer while she doubled back through the woods. Bones's expression hardened, his knuckles whitening on the rifle. She knows these forests better than any of us, he said, as much to himself as to the others. She'll make it back. But the worry in his eyes belied his confident words. 30 years had passed since he'd ridden with Wildcat, since they'd faced danger together. The woman he'd known then had been fierce and resourceful, but the years changed people, softened them, made them vulnerable. Hammer joined them on the porch, his young face grim. Reyes's son is secure about 2 miles east, zip-tied to a tree and likely still unconscious. Maggie said he'd be our leverage. Bones nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. Smart thinking. Victor might be willing to sacrifice his men, but not his own blood. Jackson turned to Hammer. You said you left him by the creek, just past the fork where it joins up with Bear Stream. The sheriff exchanged a meaningful glance with Bones. If Maggie's doubling back through the woods, she'll be coming up along the eastern ridge. There's an old logging trail that runs parallel to it, comes out about half a mile from here. I know it, Bones said, already moving toward his motorcycle. I'll find her. Not alone, Jackson countered, reaching for his jacket. You don't know where Reyes' men are positioned. I'm coming too, Lily said firmly, her green eyes, so like her mother's, flashing with determination. Bones paused, studying his daughter's face. In the short time since discovering her existence, he had already recognized in her the same stubborn resilience that had drawn him to her mother all those years ago. It was strange how genetics worked, how this young woman he'd never known could carry herself with a posture so familiar it made his chest ache. You stay here, he said, his tone brooking no argument. If your mother makes it back while we're gone, someone needs to be here. And if Reyes attacks again, he glanced around at the remaining bikers, all of them showing the wear of the night's battle. They'll need your medical training. Before Lily could protest, Preacher stepped forward. Girl's got a point, boss. You and the sheriff are both wounded. Might need an extra pair of hands out there. Bones hesitated, torn between the tactical sense of what Preacher was saying and his instinct to protect the daughter he'd just found. I can ride, Lily said, a note of challenge in her voice. And I can shoot if I have to. Mom made sure of that. A flicker of surprise crossed Bones' weathered face. Maggie taught you to handle firearms. Lily nodded. Every summer since I was 12, she said a woman should know how to protect herself. I just didn't realize until now what she was preparing me for. Something like pride flickered in Bones' ice blue eyes. Take Lou's bike, he said after a moment. Stay behind us, and if there's trouble, you hang back. Understood. It wasn't really a question, and Lily recognized the tone of a man accustomed to having his orders followed. She nodded once, accepting the keys that Lou tossed her way. Within minutes, 3 motorcycles thundered down the rutted road leading away from the cabin. Bones in the lead, Jackson following, and Lily bringing up the rear, her blonde hair streaming behind her as she handled the powerful machine with unexpected confidence. As the sound of engines faded into the distance, Preacher turned to Hammer. Go get the truck from where we stashed it yesterday. We're going to need more firepower when Victor makes his next move. Hammer nodded and headed out, leaving Preacher, Lou, and the other 2 bikers to fortify their position as best they could with dwindling ammunition and bodies worn from a night of battle. None of them voiced the grim reality that hung over them like a shadow. Even if they found Maggie, even if they retrieved Daniel Reyes' leverage, they were still outnumbered and outgunned. And Victor Reyes had waited 30 years for his revenge. He wasn't going to stop until blood had paid for blood. The old logging trail wound through the forest like a scar overgrown, after years of disuse but still visible to those who knew where to look. Bones led the way, his motorcycle navigating the rutted path with the sure-footed confidence of a rider who had spent most of his life on 2 wheels. Every few hundred yards he would stop, cut the engine, and listen, straining to hear any sound that didn't belong to the forest. Jackson rode beside him when the trail widened enough, his sheriff's training evident in the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, alert for any sign of threat or ambush. Lily stayed a careful distance behind, following their lead while keeping watch on their rear. They had traveled about 2 miles when Bones suddenly raised his hand, signaling a halt. The 3 of them killed their engines simultaneously, and in the sudden silence, the forest sounds became magnified. Birds calling, leaves rustling, the distant gurgle of running water. And something else, a faint, rhythmic scraping sound coming from somewhere ahead. Bones dismounted, drawing the .45 from his waistband. He motioned for Jackson and Lily to stay with the bikes as he moved forward on foot, his boots making little sound on the pine needle-strewn path. Years of living on the edge had taught him to move silently when necessary, to become just another shadow in the forest. He followed the sound, which grew more distinct as he approached. The unmistakable rasp of metal against metal, deliberate and controlled. A familiar sound to anyone who had spent time in outlaw culture. Someone was sharpening a blade. Bones paused behind a massive oak, peering carefully around its gnarled trunk. In a small clearing about 30 yards ahead, a man sat on a fallen log, methodically running a whetstone along the edge of a hunting knife. His back was to Bones, but the set of his shoulders and the silver streaking his dark hair were achingly familiar. "Hello, Frank," the man said without turning around, his voice carrying clearly in the morning stillness. "Been a long time. Bones stepped into the clearing, his 45 held loosely at his side, but ready. Snake, he replied, the name feeling strange on his tongue after 30 years. Heard you were dead. Jacob Snake Miller turned slowly on the log to face his former club brother. Time had not been kind to him. His once handsome face was now a roadmap of deep lines and poorly healed scars, his right eye clouded with cataracts, his mouth a bitter slash beneath a salt and pepper mustache. But the calculating intelligence still burned in his good eye, the same cold assessment that had made him such an effective treasurer for the club all those years ago. Not dead, Snake said with a mirthless smile. Just reinvented. He continued sharpening the knife, seemingly unconcerned by Bones's weapon. I figured you might show up once Victor got out. Old debts have a way of coming due, don't they? Bones took another step forward, scanning the clearing for any sign that Snake wasn't alone. Where is she, Jake? Snake tilted his head, feigning confusion. You mean Wildcat? Or does she go by Maggie these days? He tested the knife's edge with his thumb. Such a shame, beautiful woman. Talented, too. Could have been something special if she hadn't run off to play house. I'm not going to ask again, Bones said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. Snake sighed, sliding the knife into a sheath at his belt. Relax, brother. Your old lady is fine for now. She's having a little reunion with Victor. Long overdue, wouldn't you say? Bones raised the 45, pointing it squarely at Snake's forehead. Where the old Crow River Mill, Snake replied, unfazed by the weapon. Where it all went down 30 years ago. Victor's got a sentimental streak a mile wide. Thinks everything should come full circle. A cold dread settled in Bones's gut. The abandoned lumber mill where Miguel Reyes had died, where the club's fortunes had changed irrevocably. Of course Victor would take her there. It wasn't just revenge he wanted, it was symmetry. Why are you telling me this? Bones demanded, suspicion narrowing his eyes. Snake spread his hands, a gesture of faux innocence. Maybe I've got a sentimental streak too. Or maybe I just want to see how it all plays out. His expression hardened. Or maybe I'm just the distraction. The last word had barely left his lips when the crack of a rifle shot split the air. Bones dropped instinctively, rolling behind the fallen log as bullets thudded into the wood. Snake hadn't moved, still sitting calmly as chaos erupted around them. Victor's got men all through these woods, he called over the gunfire. Did you really think you could just ride in and save the day like some aging knight in leather armor? Bones returned fire, his 45 thundering in the confined space of the clearing. From the direction of the bikes, he heard Jackson's service weapon join the fight, the distinctive report of a Glock cutting through the cacophony. Lily! Bones shouted fear for his newly discovered daughter, lancing through him like a physical pain. Get back to the cabin. Whether she heard him or not was impossible to tell as the forest erupted into a full-blown firefight. Bones caught a glimpse of movement to his right, one of Reyes's men trying to flank him. He shifted his aim and fired twice, rewarded with a cry of pain as the man fell. When he turned back, Snake was gone, vanished into the underbrush as silently as he had appeared. The bastard had always been good at slipping away when things got hot, had done the same thing at Crow River all those years ago, disappearing with $2 million while bullets flew and blood spilled. Bones pushed the thought aside, focusing on the immediate danger. He counted at least 3 shooters, maybe more, their positions revealed by muzzle flashes among the trees. The odds weren't good, but he'd faced worse in his time and lived to tell about it. A new sound joined the chaos, the roar of a motorcycle engine followed by another. Jackson and Lily were on the move. Good. The bikes were their best chance of breaking out of the ambush. Bones fired again, providing cover as he backed toward where he'd left his own bike. A bullet whined past his ear, close enough that he felt the displacement of air. Another struck the tree beside him, showering him with splinters of bark. Bones! Jackson's voice carried over the gunfire. This way? Following the sound, Bones crashed through the underbrush, keeping low as bullets continued to seek him out. He found Jackson crouched behind a massive fallen tree, his service weapon aimed back the way Bones had come. Where's Lily? Bones demanded, dropping down beside him. She circled around on the bike, Jackson replied, firing off 2 more rounds, creating a diversion on the north side of the clearing. Fear and pride warred in Bones' chest. The girl had guts, that was clear, just like her mother. But if anything happened to her, "We need to move," he said, checking the ammunition in his 45. 3 rounds left. Not enough. Snake says Victor's taken Maggie to the old mill at Crow River. Jackson's eyes widen. That's 30 miles from here. Which means we need to get moving now, Bones replied grimly, before they spring whatever trap they've set for us. The sound of an engine approaching cut through their discussion. Lily appeared on Lou's motorcycle, keeping it at a walking pace as she navigated through the trees toward them. "There's a fire road about 100 yards east," she called, keeping her voice low. "It runs parallel to the highway. Most of them are focused on the main trail." But Jackson and Bones exchanged a quick glance of approval. The girl had a good tactical mind, another trait she must have inherited. "Lead the way," Bones told her, already moving toward his own bike. Within moments, the three of them were threading their way through the dense forest away from the ambush and toward the fire road Lily had discovered. The occasional crack of a rifle behind them indicated that Reyes's men were still searching, but the sound grew fainter as they put distance between themselves and the clearing. When they reached the narrow dirt track that served as a fire road, Bones pulled alongside Lily, gesturing for her to stop. "You head back to the cabin," he ordered. "Tell the others where we've gone. Have them bring every weapon they can lay hands on to the Crow River mill." Lily shook her head, her eyes, so like Maggie's, flashing with stubborn determination. "I'm coming with you." "This isn't a debate," Bones said, the echo of Maggie's earlier words to Lily not lost on any of them. "You're right, it's not," Lily replied. "That's my mother they have, and I'm trained as a nurse. If she's hurt—" She left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. Bones wanted to argue further, to protect this daughter he'd only just discovered, to shield her from the violent world he'd inhabited for so long. But there was no time, and the steel in her eyes told him it would be a wasted effort anyway. "Stay behind us," he conceded finally. "And if I tell you to run, you run, no questions asked." Lily nodded, once accepting the terms. With a roar of engines, the three motorcycles sped down the fire road, racing against time and the weight of 30 years of hatred. Bones led the way, his mind filled with images of Maggie, not the librarian she had become, but the Wildcat he had known and loved, the woman who had once saved his life and then disappeared from it completely. He had failed to protect her once. He wouldn't fail again. The abandoned lumber mill at Crow River stood like a monument to decay, its once imposing structure, now a skeleton of rusted metal and rotting timber. Vines crawled up its sides, nature slowly reclaiming what man had built and then discarded. The massive saw that had once cut through old-growth redwoods lay dormant and rusted, its toothed edge still menacing despite years of neglect. Inside, dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that penetrated the holes in the roof, creating ethereal columns in the cavernous main floor. The catwalks above, where Miguel Reyes had met his end 3 decades earlier, sagged dangerously in places, their metal supports eaten away by years of exposure to the elements. In the center of the mill floor, Maggie Hayes sat bound to a wooden chair, her head held high despite the dried blood on her temple and the bruises darkening her cheekbone. Her green eyes burned with a defiance that the years of quiet living in Pinewood had never fully extinguished. Victor Reyes paced before her, a silver-haired predator whose movements retained the coiled menace of his younger days despite the slight limp in his right leg, a souvenir from the bullet Bones had put in him 30 years ago. At 67, his face was a roadmap of hard living and harder choices, deep lines carved by decades of hatred and vengeance. "I've imagined this moment for 30 years, he said, his accent still carrying traces of his border town upbringing. "In prison, it was what kept me going. The thought of finding you, of making you pay for what you took from me." "I didn't take the money, Victor," Maggie replied, her voice steady. "How many times do I have to tell you?" Victor laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "The money, you think this is about the money." He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "You took my brother. You took Miguel." His voice broke slightly on the name. He was 19 years old, 19. Maggie met his gaze unflinchingly. "He was about to kill Bones. I made a choice." "Yes, you did," Victor straightened, "and now I'm making mine." He nodded to one of his men, who disappeared into the shadows of the mill's interior. Moments later, he returned, pushing a figure ahead of him, a young man with a shaved head and a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. Hammer. His face was bloodied, one eye swollen shut, but he walked under his own power, glaring defiantly at his captors. Your rescue party wasn't as stealthy as they thought, Victor said to Maggie. We picked this one up about 5 miles from here scouting the area. He circled Hammer slowly. Young for a Hell's Angel. Probably wasn't even born when you killed Miguel. Leave him out of this, Maggie said, her voice hardening. Your quarrel is with me, not him. Victor smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. My quarrel is with everyone who wears that patch. He gestured to the death's head insignia on Hammer's vest. But don't worry, he's not the main event, just the opening act. He turned to the shadows at the far end of the mill floor. Bring her in. Maggie's breath caught as two more of Victor's men emerged, dragging a struggling figure between them. Blonde hair tangled around a face that was the mirror of Maggie's own at that age. Lily, she whispered, horror washing through her. But it wasn't Lily. As the woman was brought closer, subtle differences became apparent. This woman was older, perhaps in her early 30s, with a hardness to her features that Lily lacked. And her eyes, when they met Maggie's, were brown, not green. Meet Anna, Victor said, watching Maggie's reaction closely. My little theatrical insurance policy. Amazing what a blonde dye job in the right clothes can do, isn't it? From a distance in the right light, could be mistaken for your daughter. Maggie's confusion must have shown on her face because Victor smiled again, this predatory expression more genuine than before. You see, I needed to make sure Bones would come running, and what better way than to let him think his long-lost daughter was in danger? He shrugged. Of course, I didn't count on him actually finding the real thing after all these years. That was an unexpected bonus. Understanding dawned on Maggie with sickening clarity. The attack on the cabin, the ambush in the woods, it was all to separate us, to draw him out. Smart lady, Victor nodded approvingly. Always were. It's why I never believed you didn't take the money. He checked his watch. Bones should be here any minute now if I know him. And I do. Men like us were predictable in our own way. As if on cue, the distant rumble of motorcycle engines echoed through the decrepit building. Victor's smile widened. Right on time, he said softly. You'll have to excuse me, Maggie. I have a welcoming party to arrange. He moved away, barking orders to his men, who took up positions around the mill floor, weapons ready. Hammer was forced to his knees near Maggie, hands bound behind his back. The woman called Anna was similarly restrained, her expression, suggesting this wasn't the role she had signed up for. Mrs. Hayes, Hammer murmured, keeping his voice low as their captors focused on the approaching motorcycles. The others are close. Preacher and Lou were about 20 minutes behind me with heavy weapons. A flicker of hope kindled in Maggie's chest. If some of the club had escaped the ambush, if they were on their way with reinforcements, but the hope faded as quickly as it had come. Even with backup, they were outnumbered and outgunned. And Victor had had 30 years to plan this endgame. He would have contingencies in place for every scenario. The motorcycle engines grew louder, then cut off abruptly. Silence fell heavy and ominous. Victor positioned himself about 20 feet from Maggie, flanked by 4 of his men, all armed with automatic weapons. He nodded to another man near the mill's entrance, who shouted into the morning air, "We have Wildcat and one of your guys come in unarmed or they die." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the massive sliding door at the front of the mill creaked open a few feet, letting in a shaft of sunlight that illuminated the dust-filled air. Bones stepped through, his hands raised to shoulder height, empty. Behind him came Sheriff Jackson, similarly unarmed. And behind them both, Maggie's heart clenched with fear, came Lily, her chin high, her green eyes scanning the interior of the mill until they locked with her mother's. "That's far enough," Victor called as the 3 of them moved toward the center of the mill floor. "Frank Hawkins, still alive after all these years. I'm almost impressed." Bones ignored him, his ice-blue eyes fixed on Maggie. "You okay, Kat?" he asked, using her old road name with a familiarity that bridged the decades between them. "Been better," she replied, the ghost of a smile touching her lips, despite the circumstances. Victor scowled at the exchange. Very touching. The old lovers reunited. His gaze shifted to Lily, and the daughter you never knew existed. Quite the family reunion. Bones turned his attention to Victor, his weathered face impassive. "Let them go, Reyes. This is between you and me." "No, it's between all of us," Victor replied. "You and me, Wildcat here. We're all connected by what happened in this very building 30 years ago." He gestured expansively at their surroundings. "Right there on that catwalk is where Miguel died, where she shot him and watched him fall. To save my life, Bones said evenly, and that makes it acceptable. Victor's voice rose. That makes it right that my little brother bled out on this concrete floor while I held him. The raw pain in his voice echoed in the cavernous space, a grief undiminished by the passage of time. For a moment, all of them, captors and captives alike, were silent, the weight of the past pressing down on them like a physical force. It was Lily who broke the silence, her voice clear and steady in the dusty air. "I'm sorry about your brother," she said, taking a step forward, despite Jackson's warning hand on her arm. "I can't imagine that kind of loss. But this, all of this, won't bring him back. Nothing will." Victor stared at her, momentarily caught off guard by the direct address. His eyes narrowed as he studied her face, the face that was so like her mother's, with the determined chin of her father. "You're right about that," he said finally. "Loving will bring Miguel back. But justice, vengeance, that's still on the table." He raised his hand, and his men tensed weapons at the ready. "Here's how this is going to work," Victor continued. "Wildcat is going to tell me where the $2 million is. Then I'm going to kill her just like she killed Miguel. And then, Frank, I'm going to kill you, slowly, while your daughter watches." "I don't have your money," Maggie insisted. "I never did." Victor's face contorted with rage. "Stop lying," he shouted. "You disappeared right after Crow River. You and the money both gone without a trace." "Because I was pregnant," Maggie shot back, her own anger finally breaking through. "I left because I was carrying Lily, and I knew I couldn't raise a child in that world. I didn't take your blood money. I didn't want any part of it." Victor advanced on her, his hand moving to the gun at his waistband. "One last chance, Wildcat. Where is it?" "She doesn't have it," a new voice called from the shadows at the back of the mill. "Never did." All heads turned as a figure emerged from the darkness. Snake, his scarred face impassive, his hands empty at his sides. Victor's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about, Jake?" Snake moved forward, ignoring the weapons that swung in his direction. "Maggie's telling the truth. She didn't take the money." He stopped, a bitter smile twisting his lips. "I did." The confession hung in the air, stunning everyone into silence. "You," Victor finally managed, disbelief evident in his voice. "You took it." Snake nodded. "When the shooting started, everyone scattered. I saw my chance and I took it. $2 million in cash right there for the taking. So I took it and I ran. Never looked back." Bones stared at his former club brother, 30 years of suspicion finally confirmed. "Where is it now?" "Gone," Snake replied with a shrug. "Spent it all years ago. Fast cars, faster women, bad investments. You know how it goes." Victor's face had gone pale with rage, his hands shaking slightly as he pointed his gun at Snake. "All these years, all this time I spent planning my revenge on her, and you had it all along." "That's the thing about revenge, Victor," Snake said calmly. "It's based on what you think you know, not what really happened." For a heartbeat, the mill was utterly silent, Victor frozen in disbelief. Snake standing calmly before him, everyone else watching the drama unfold with bated breath. Then in one smooth motion, Snake reached behind his back and produced a small revolver. Before anyone could react, he fired, not at Victor, but at the ropes binding Maggie to the chair. Chaos erupted. Maggie lunged from the chair as it splintered beneath her, diving for cover behind a rusted piece of machinery. Bones moved with the speed and precision of a man half his age, tackling Lily to the ground as Victor's men opened fire. Jackson drew a backup weapon from an ankle holster, returning fire, as he rolled behind a concrete pillar. Hammer, still bound, threw himself sideways, knocking over the woman Anna and shielding her with his body as bullets whined overhead. Snake fired again and again, each shot finding its mark with deadly accuracy. Two of Victor's men fell before they could properly aim their weapons. A third managed to get off a burst of automatic fire, but the bullets went wild, chewing into the rotting timber of the walls. Victor himself had dropped to one knee, firing at Snake with grim determination. The two old enemies exchanged shots across the mill floor, neither finding their target as dust and splinters flew around them. From outside came the thunder of approaching motorcycles. Preacher Lou and the rest of the club arriving with the promised reinforcements. Victor, hearing the sound, realized his carefully laid trap was collapsing around him. With a bellow of rage, he charged across the open space toward where Maggie had taken cover. His gun raised, all pretense of calculated revenge abandoned in favor of simple direct violence. Bones saw the movement and reacted instantly, throwing himself into Victor's path. The two men collided with bone-jarring force, crashing to the concrete floor in a tangle of limbs and fury. The guns skittered away as they grappled, decades of hatred fueling their strength despite their age. Victor managed to get on top of his hand, finding Bones' throat, squeezing with all the pent-up rage of 30 years. Bones' face reddened, his ice-blue eyes bulging as he fought for breath, his fingers clawing at Victor's grip. A shot rang out, the sound distinct from the ongoing firefight around them. Victor jerked, a look of surprise crossing his face. His hands loosened on Bones' throat as he slowly looked down at the growing red stain on his chest. Standing 10 feet away, Maggie held a fallen man's weapon, her aim steady, her eyes cold with the same determination that had saved Bones' life 3 decades earlier. Victor toppled sideways, his life's blood pooling on the same concrete floor where his brother had died. As the light faded from his eyes, he looked up at Maggie, incomprehension giving way to a final bitter understanding. History had repeated itself after all, but not in the way he had planned. The reinforcements burst through the mill doors, Preacher and Lou leading the charge with shotguns blazing. Victor's remaining men, outgunned and leaderless, threw down their weapons or fled into the surrounding forest. In moments, the fight was over. The mill fell silent once more, save for the groans of the wounded and the creak of the old building settling back into its century-long decay. Maggie dropped the gun, her hands trembling now that the moment of crisis had passed. She moved to where Bones still lay on his back, helping him to sit up as he gulped air into his oxygen-starved lungs. Just like old times, he managed to rasp a ghost of his old grin flickering across his face. "Some things never change," she replied softly, the weight of their shared past, both the good and the bad, hanging between them. Lily appeared at their side, dropping to her knees beside them. Without hesitation, she threw her arms around her mother, holding her tightly as the reality of their survival washed over them. After a moment, she reached out one hand to Bones, including him in the embrace. For the first time in her life, Lily was holding both her parents at once. The fierce protective mother who had raised her and the father she had never known existed until yesterday. The circle of their family, broken for so long, was finally complete. Across the mill floor, Snake sat propped against a pillar, blood seeping from a wound in his side. Jackson knelt beside him, applying pressure to stem the bleeding. "Why should I?" the sheriff asked quietly. "After all these years, why come clean now?" Snake's scarred face twisted into a pained smile. "Maybe I got tired of running. Maybe I wanted to set the record straight before checking out." His good eye drifted to where Maggie, Bones, and Lily huddled together. "Or maybe I just wanted to see if anything could ever make it right." "And did it?" Jackson pressed. Snake didn't answer, his gaze still fixed on the family reunion playing out amid the dust and blood of the old mill. Something like regret flickered across his face. Regret for the choices made, the paths not taken, the loyalty abandoned for the hollow promise of wealth. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, its light streaming through the holes in the mill's roof, illuminating the aftermath of violence with an incongruously gentle glow. The distant wail of sirens announced the approach of law enforcement and emergency services called by one of the club members once the fighting stopped. Maggie helped Bones to his feet, her arm around his waist as he leaned on her for support. 30 years had changed them. Both had taken them down separate paths that neither could have predicted on that fateful night at Crow River. But in this moment, it was as if no time had passed at all. They moved together with the easy synchronicity of two people whose lives had once been inextricably entwined. Lily watched them, seeing for the first time the shadow of who her mother had been before. Wildcat, fierce and loyal woman who had faced death without flinching to protect those she loved. And seeing too the man her father was, complicated, dangerous, but governed by a code of honor that had brought him back to Maggie's side when she needed him most. As they walked together toward the mill entrance, toward the waiting motorcycles and the open road beyond, Lily realized that her life had been forever changed by the events of the past 24 hours. The comfortable predictability of Pinewood, of Ruby's diner, and quiet evenings with her mother seemed like a lifetime ago. What lay ahead was uncertain. There would be questions to answer, explanations to give, decisions to make about where they went from here. But one thing was clear: the secrets that had shadowed their lives for so long had finally been brought into the light. And in that light, painful as it was, they had found something they hadn't expected to find amid the violence and vengeance redemption. Not the easy kind that comes from pretending the past never happened, but the harder, truer kind that comes from facing it head on and finding a way forward despite it all. As they emerged into the sunlight, Bones paused, looking back at the decrepit mill one last time, at the place where so much had ended and where improbably something new had just begun. "Ready to ride?" he asked, his voice rough but tinged with something like hope. Maggie looked at Lily, a question in her eyes. Lily nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "Ready," Maggie replied, speaking for them both. And together, the three of them walked away from Crow River, leaving the ghosts of the past behind them at last. 1 month later, the bell above the door at Ruby's Diner jingled as Lily entered. But instead of her usual waitress uniform, she wore jeans and a leather jacket with a small, tasteful skull pin on the lapel, a nod to her newfound heritage, but not an embrace of it. Sheriff Jackson sat at his usual spot, nursing a cup of coffee. "Ready for your first day back at nursing school?" he asked as she slid onto the stool beside him. Lily smiled, the past month's events having aged her in subtle ways. "More than ready." The scholarship from the Veterans Memorial Fund came through. What she didn't mention was that the fund had been established with what remained of the $2 million that Snake had confessed to having hidden away, not spent as he'd claimed. Before succumbing to his wounds, he'd given Bones coordinates to a storage unit where he'd kept a retirement package, enough to ensure Lily could finish her education and Maggie could get the heart treatment she needed. The legal aftermath had been messy but manageable. Jackson's influence had helped frame the events at the mill as self-defense against a drug cartel's vendetta. Daniel Reyes surprisingly had corroborated their story, seeming almost relieved to be free of his father's obsession. He was serving time, but with the possibility of parole, a second chance his father had squandered. "Your mother heading out with Bones today?" Jackson asked, a complex emotion crossing his weathered face. "Just for the weekend," Lily said. "Some rally in Arizona. She says riding helps her think." The relationship between her parents remained complicated, neither fully together nor fully apart, but connected by a past that could never be erased and a daughter they both loved. "And you're okay with all this, the truth about who they were, who you are?" Lily considered the question as she gazed around the diner, the place where it had all started with an innocent comment about a tattoo. "I'm learning to be," she said finally. "Mom's still mom, even with a motorcycle and a gun permit. And Bones, well, he's trying. That counts for something." Outside, the rumble of a Harley announced Maggie's arrival. She parked beside the sleek black motorcycle Bones had gifted Lily, a peace offering, a connection, an invitation to know her father on her own terms. Lily stood, dropping a few bills on the counter. "See you Monday, Sheriff." As she stepped into the sunshine, she saw her mother waiting, looking both familiar and strange in her riding leather, the winged skull tattoo now proudly displayed on her forearm rather than hidden beneath cardigans and long sleeves. Behind her mother in the distance, a group of Harleys approached. Bones and a few of the older members, a respectful distance but present nonetheless. They had all found a new equilibrium. Not perfect, not without complications, but honest in a way their lives had never been before. "Ready?" Maggie asked. Lily swung her leg over her bike, feeling the power of the machine beneath her, a tangible connection to the father she was just beginning to know. "Ready," she replied. Together they rode toward the highway, toward whatever future awaited a family forged in fire, and finally, after 30 years, made whole again.